Madam Chairperson and friends, I've slightly changed my title. This is Traditional Knowledge Systems and Archaeology in India, Problems and Perspectives. I'll be dwelling upon three terms, basically: traditional knowledge system, new museology, and autoethnography. And because these three terms I am using deliberately, because there is in all these three terms, the community is the most important aspect. Traditional knowledge system, new museology, and autoethnography. And then I'll come back, or while discussing that, I'll be discussing its relevance or implications for archaeology in India. Now the problem is, next please. In an attempt to establish a linkage between indigenous knowledge system and Indian archaeology, the present paper aims at raising some problems and perspectives. And to begin with, in case of USA or Canada or Australia, there is a clear distinction between indigenous population and settler population. That is not the case in India. So that makes India much more problematic. So in India, it is difficult to get such a clear division because migrations have taken place right from prehistory to in different historical phases. Therefore, in my opinion, either the term indigenous is not appropriate in context of India, or even if it is used, its connotation is not the same as you use in the West. Therefore, in Indian context, I am using, I think it is more useful to use the term traditional rather than indigenous. Although the term traditionally is also not foolproof, but I think that is the best I could think of at this stage. Next, please. Now, how do we define traditional knowledge? It is the information that people in a given community, based on experience and adaptations to local culture and environment, have developed over time and continue to develop. It is used to sustain the community and its culture and to maintain the genetic resources necessary for the continued survival of the community. That is what Hansen and von Fleet defines. Now, what are the important features? All of you know, it is collective in nature, often considered the property of the entire community. It is transmitted through specific cultural and traditional exchange mechanisms. It is traditional because it is created in a manner that reflects the tradition of the community, therefore not relating to the nature of the knowledge itself. Traditional means it is not just the nature is traditional, no, but to the way in which the knowledge is created, preserved, and disseminated. That is what we call it traditional. Next, please. Now, sometimes it is co-terminus with indigenous knowledge. And here, Warren, while he was writing a World Bank report in 1991 regarding agriculture and use of indigenous knowledge system, he is again defining or using it as a kind of local knowledge that is unique to a given culture or society. And this indigenous knowledge or traditional knowledge contrasts with the international knowledge system generated by universities, research institutions, and private firms. And the basis for local level decision making, this indigenous knowledge or local knowledge, traditional knowledge helps in the decision making in agriculture, healthcare, and others. It is passed down from generation to generation, all of us know, by word of mouth. That is very important. This knowledge system has value not only for the culture in which it evolves, but also for scientists and planners striving to improve the conditions in rural localities, because you are writing a document for World Bank. Next, please. I'm sorry for it is too small, but then small is beautiful. Gadgil had emphasized that how the importance of traditional knowledge system for the protection of biodiversity and have been gradually being realized by the international community. For example, the United Nations 1992 Article 8 of the Convention of Biological Diversity, it is stated that to respect, preserve, and maintain knowledge, innovation, and practice of indigenous and local communities, embodying traditional lifestyles relevant for the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity. So gradually, people are coming up realizing the importance of traditional knowledge or indigenous knowledge. But then there is a difficulty because there is no universal definition available for that. There are many terms which are being used. For example, this is what Bark had stated. For example, traditional knowledge or traditional ecological knowledge, local knowledge, indigenous knowledge or science, folk knowledge, farmers knowledge, Fisher's knowledge, tacit knowledge. No, there are so many terms which have a bearing on traditional knowledge or indigenous knowledge which are being used. The word traditional, for example, places the emphasis on the transmission of knowledge along with a cultural continuity, but might ignore the ability of traditional societies to adapt to changing circumstances. This is the problem when you are using the term traditional. Indigenous is meant to highlight the autochthonous nature of this knowledge, but it might overlook knowledge from populations who are not officially recognized as indigenous. Likewise, the word local can be applied to different geographic context, but it lacks specificity. Therefore, the traditional ecological knowledge is interpreted as a cumulative body of knowledge, practices, and representations that describes the relationship of living beings with one another and with their physical environment. Now, next. Now, traditional knowledge as ethnoarchaeology, because all of us who work on Indian archaeology, know more about it, but then I'll just rush through. As you know, ethnoarchaeology was coined by J.W. Fix in 1900 when he expressed himself as an ethnoarchaeologist. I like Longacre's definition, although it is very old. It is a study by archaeologists of variability in material culture and its relations to human behavior and organization among extant societies, but for use in for use in archaeological interpretation. But he emphasized that ethnoarchaeology has to be done by an archaeologist. This is more important. Kramer also writes very well. It's an attempt of archaeologists to systematically define relationship between behavior and material culture, not often explored by ethnologists, and to ascertain how certain features of observable behavior may be reflected in remains which archaeologists may find. Next, please. When you come to ethnoarchaeology in India, this importance of ethnographic accounts on the bewildering diversity of tribal communities in Indian subcontinent for archaeology has been appreciated right from 19th century. For example, James Ferguson and Alexander Cunningham. But those of you who know art history, it is James Ferguson who published his rock cut caves in India in 1840s, but then he became more famous in 1860s and 70s when he for the first time in Indian context gave a historical perspective of the temple traditions of India. That he has done the same thing for Odishan archaeology as well. Now, but then relationship between ethnology and archaeology. Ferguson writing way back in 1893, ethnology will never take the place which it is really entitled to till its results are checked and its conclusion elucidated by the science of archaeology. This tradition was continued in today's century by, again, John Marshall and Mackay. Therefore, Bridget Alston rightly calls that archaeologists working on India resort to what Bridget Alston calls spontaneous ethnoarchaeology. Next, please. In 1923, Panchanan Mitra, one of the, I think the first teacher or one of the early faculty members of Department of Anthropology, Calcutta University wrote, prehistoric archaeology and ethnology are two branches of science and are complementary to each other. The Andamines, whose stone implements could hardly be distinguished from prehistoric implements, perhaps perpetuated directly a culture predominant in the Indian peninsula in Pleistocene and possibly in earlier times. Next, please. Now, Subbarao, as you know, Subbarao, who is famous for his classic book, The Personality of India, I think he wrote that book. There is a book, I think, published in 1930s. I'm forgetting the author, but The Personality of Great Britain. I think, keeping that in mind, he wrote this. And Subbarao was, I think, one of the greatest theoretical archaeologists who was emerging, and it's a great loss that he died very young. The archaeologist draws heavily on ethnology and uses the knowledge gained by the study of the life and behavior of living communities, particularly of people who are historically backward in earlier stages of civilization. Nagaraj Rao reconstructed the Neolithic dwellings of Tekalakota on the basis of the huts of the Boyas of Karnataka. Malti Nagar related archaeological remains of Ahar to the hills of Rajasthan. And in the last 5 decades, the impact of processual paradigm in South Asian archaeology has led to a spurt of ethnoarchaeological research. And you find that the major areas that ethnoarchaeological researchers have covered include settlement, subsistence, arts and crafts, exchange, and mortuary practices. But nextly, but then there are, to me, there are one or two limitations of ethnoarchaeology in Indian context. The first is the subsistence strategies of Indian tribal groups are projected as archaic survival of the cultural traits of the remote past assumed to be unaffected by the turbulence of historical processes. This is not surprising because of the influence of processual paradigm, which is with its emphasis on functionalism. In other words, such studies fell into the trap of presenting its inhabitants as timeless representatives of an unchanging traditional culture. Next. Now here, I would like to draw the attention of Surajit Sinha, the well-known anthropologist, social anthropologist, view on the hunter-gatherers in India. That he considers there are two levels of hunter-gatherers in India. First is hunter-gatherers of the Andaman Islands remained isolated until recently, and hence they were primitive. But then he is also talking of hunter-gatherers in the Indian mainland underwent a process of what he called secondary primitivization or devolution. Since the encroachment of the caste-based economy and extensive deforestation forced many of the tribal Sweden cultivators of the hills slopes in Central East India, for example, the Birhors and the hill Kodias of Jharkhand and Odisha, to specialize in hunting and gathering. In other words, hunting and gathering, which was a subsidiary mode of subsistence, became a primary mode in course of time. This, we archaeologists conveniently forget. Therefore, next slide. In ethnoarchaeology, emphasis is given on the study of existing tribal cultures, mostly under duress or stress, partly because of ecology and partly because of the onslaught of the advanced social groups. This creates a problem in direct historical approach. Because if we accept that the people of Stone Age culture were the original affluent community, I'm here using Marshall Sahalin's Stone Age economics reference, and going by the processual archaeologist version, if one treats culture as an extrasomatic means of adaptation, it remains to be answered how far the study of a culture under a stressful situation, meaning adaptive strategies for scarcity, can meaningfully explain the culture of a plentiful phenomenon, that is adaptive strategies for plenty. This calls for a more critical approach in ethnoarchaeology. Next slide, please. Next, I want to show the similarities and differences between the linkages of traditional knowledge system and archaeology in India between colonial and post-colonial periods. As all of us know, archaeology developed as a scientific discipline during the colonial period to reconstruct the past. Documenting traditional knowledge system was primarily in the domain of ethnography, colonial ethnography. Now, ethnography was developed in the colonies to study the other from the vantage point of the colonial master. Archaeology demonstrated the grandeur of the past of India, and ethnographic studies by colonial masters emphasized the exotic aspects of tribal cultural practices. Next slide, please. Therefore, in such colonial ethnography, the colonial masters romanticized exotic cultural aspects, considered cultural practices of the natives as unscientific and barbarian, constructed colonial stereotypes, for example, martial races. Thus, colonial archaeology valorized the past of India by emphasizing the grandeur of the past. Colonial ethnography, on the other hand, demonized the present by emphasizing the squalor of the present of tribal groups. However, both archaeology and ethnography during colonial period claimed to be scientific practice. Both provided legitimacy of colonial rule in India in the name of civilizing mission, so that the grandeur of the past could be revived and the uncivilized present could be civilized. Next, please. Now, let me come to the question of new museology. During the 1970s, there was a paradigm shift in museology. Two concepts were popular: new ecomuseology and new museology. Sometimes, these two terms are being used overlapping manner. Ecomuseology was coined by Hugh D. Verin in 1971 to help develop the concept of museums linked with ecology at the time of the first UN Conference of Environment in 1972. Subsequently, it was used for different kinds of institutions, such as open-air museum or interpretation centers in natural parks, villages, or small ethnography museums, industrial archaeology museums, community museums, etc. Next, please. Sorry for it's too small letters. While recognizing French national parks, Georges Henri Rivere decided to persuade the communities to decide for themselves about what they intend to preserve their unique heritage. Now, this is a basic difference. What is happening is in traditional museology, what do? There is an arrogance of the curator. The curator goes, collects samples, come back, makes documentation, and curate an exhibition. But Here, there is a departure. Here, the community is giving more emphasis. The community is suggested that please let us know what you want to preserve. But in case of traditional museology, there is a scramble for growth that represents the ideal of traditional museology. But ecomuseology does not emphasize does not lay emphasis on growth beyond an optimum limit because of the concept of participatory republic. With the question of participatory republic is introduced into new museology. Patrick Boylan considered eco-museum as a museum concerned with the total ecology and environment, natural and human, of a defined locality. Therefore, the collective memory is the key concept in ecomuseology. Ecomuseology aspires to transform the process of heritage maintenance into a collective social enterprise. There are two kinds of early eco-museums. One is the community eco-museums, developed by different communities, and there are also institutional eco-museums, like developed by different institutions. Next, please. Now, there are typical features of new museology. You need not go through it. I'm trying to emphasize Patrick Boylan's very precise concept of new museology. The true limits of the museum should not be the boundary walls of the museum building. Rather, it should be the whole of a defined geographical territory. The subject matter should not just be the collection within the museum's building, but the total patrimony, natural and human. The most challenging of all, the museum should exist to serve not just visitors, but the total population of the museum's defined territory. In traditional museum, the driving force and control lies with the expert staff and their wishes. While in new museology, it is the community, its collective memory and will that are important. Therefore, the true owners of the museum should be ordinary people, not the staff or the governing body. The Guwahati Declaration of New Museology on 28th December 1988, India has adopted the Guwahati Declaration. All possible efforts be made to recognize the value of the contributions of new museology and much new orientation to socialize museology be recognized. The Indian concept of trusteeship, as elaborated in the Gandhian philosophy, be extended to the spheres of museums, which are to be established, maintained, and operated the hands of representatives of the concerned communities for the value-based museology work in the directions chosen by each community itself. Therefore, new museology as a whole implies erosion of the arrogance of the curator as the sole custodian of cultural heritage. It is the community enabling the community and the giving voice to the community, which is the basic thing in new museology. Now, with these two perspectives, let us next slide. What is the state of community engagement in Indian archaeology? We had very interesting presentation this morning. The problem in India is, since these people do not have access, alienation of local people with local archaeological heritage after excavation. People go and excavate, but then, the local people do not have access to the local heritage. Therefore, suddenly there is an alienating. They are by heritage, local people are in terms of the concept that we have been perpetuating. Local people are alienated instead of being the owner of the heritage. They are alienated in the name of scientific excavation. An overemphasis on archaeology as science, site conservation and management, assuming community as destroyer of heritage, has alienated the communities from archaeological site management strategies. Involving community as an important stakeholder rather than destroyer of heritage is the need of the hour. There should be, all of us, Professor Korisetter has told this morning, exhibition of excavated materials to the community or communities close to the archaeological site, involving community in inferring meanings of archaeological relics of the site, instead of treating them as they do not know their heritage, they do not understand archaeology, therefore they should not be discussed, they should not be consulted, is a very wrong strategy. And I think this implies some kind of arrogance on our part. I think whatever we excavate, whether we accept their interpretation or not, we should also ask them, how do they interpret the relics they are getting? You may accept it or not, doesn't matter, but their views should be taken into account if you want to understand the meaning of artifacts. Including local archaeological objects in community museums, involving community on protection of and conservation of local archaeological heritage, like the issue of joint forest management. Next, please. Then traditional knowledge system and Indian archaeology, some possibilities. And all of us know traditional knowledge system and archaeology are complementary. All of us know that. Now, traditional knowledge has the potentiality to be a source of more diverse archaeological interpretations. Archaeology of children and women. I know both of you have been working, and interestingly, a student of mine, Tani Chakraborty, has just finished her thesis on archaeology of children in India. This is an area which is very interesting, and here both traditional knowledge system from ethnographic sources and archaeology can give us new lights. Eco-friendly domestic architecture. I mean, I was just mentioning that in Indira Gandhi Rashtraman, there are very interesting display of habitats of different tribal communities by tribals themselves. Now, this kind of eco-friendly architecture and how do you relate to your archaeological remains also is a great possibility. Use of plants for medicinal purposes. You know, whenever we get the plant materials, we are just saying that they are being used for their subsistence. Yes, predominantly they were used for their subsistence, but their use as medicinal purposes is also an area which is known from traditional knowledge system, and its possible application or in interpretation of archaeological researches is also could be tried. More emphasis on water management practices. Professor Rajan will be making a very interesting presentation this afternoon. Traditional games. There is hardly any emphasis among anthropologists, what to speak of archaeologists, to document traditional games. Now, I'm sure there may be plenty of examples of traditional games from recovery of archaeological sites. We are not giving the emphasis on that. So archaeology can and has the potentiality to historicize the primarily ahistorical traditional knowledge system. This is very important from my point of view, because when you talk of traditional knowledge system, you know, this seems to be ahistorical, because we do not know when exactly that knowledge system has been applied. Now, archaeology, through archaeology, will be in a position to historicize traditional knowledge system. Traditional knowledge systems are also part of what UNESCO has described as intangible cultural heritage. In an age when heritage is regarded as a resource, and during a time when ecotourism and immersive tourism, now immersive museology and immersive tourism are gaining ground. These are the concepts which are gaining ground very rapidly now. When ecotourism and immersive tourism are gaining ground, there may be a creative synthesis of archaeology as a tangible heritage and traditional knowledge system as intangible cultural heritage, catering to the needs of tourists as consumer of heritage. What has happened is, when we are showing the monuments, we are so much monuments obsessed that we are just going on describing of the monument, scientific description. Yeah, to theek hai, that's fine. But what is more important, what is no less important, is to relate how the community has been linking themselves with those sculptures or those monuments. That is also equally important. There are myths, there are legends, all these things, and how the community perceives those monuments are also equally important account. Next, please. Another possibility, I'm talking of traditional knowledge system and Indian ecology, what are the different possibilities? Another possibility is to locate the lessons of traditional knowledge system from ethnographic studies of various tribal groups in India, such as sustainable livelihood, as well as symbiotic relationship between community and ecology in archaeological context. You know, this is very important, because the traditional knowledge system has been emphasizing, which we are conveniently forgetting, that they have lived with nature in a very complementary manner. We have exploited and we have destroyed nature. So we have to learn from them rather than they learning from us. Therefore, this exercise may also result in, this is what I have just stated, in dismantling the arrogance of mainstream Indian populations that the tribal people have to always learn from them. It may show that the universal message of tribal societies regarding their symbiotic relationship between nature and culture was also there in the past, which the mainstream populations have forgotten in the name of development, and which the tribal societies have retained in their collective memory. This is an important issue we should bear it in mind. Next, please. Now let me come to my third aspect, that is lessons from autoethnography. Now, this autoethnography developed in a post-colonial perspective. This autoethnography has developed in terms of a post-colonial perspective. Now, post-colonial perspective have been regarded as assertion of former colonies to decolonize their intellectual traditions. The development of autoethnography implied that it interrogated and contextualized the colonial stereotypical narratives of the tribal cultural practices in India. These are the two things: interrogated, and they also contextualized why the colonial ethnographers were describing a particular community as martial or naked or whatever the case may be. Not only the autoethnographic accounts contested that, interrogated that, but they also tried to contextualize under what circumstances they were writing. Autoethnography began in 1980s as a protest to the existing social science methodology of how the stories of the other were not accurately represented. Queen Bala Marak, this is how I'm referring to her work. Queen Bala Marak herself, I think she's from Garo. She is a professor in Northeastern Hilli University, and she has edited a very excellent volume on autoethnography in India. The colonialist approach of authoritatively entering a culture, exploiting cultural members, and then recklessly living to write about the culture for monetary and or professional gain while disregarding relational ties to cultural members. This is what Ellis et al. Have referred. Next, please.
Professor Basa, please try and sum up now.
Yeah, I think I'll take 7 minutes, maximum 5-7 minutes, I think. The term was coined by Raymond Firth in 1966. This is very interesting because Jomo Kenyatta, who subsequently became the president of Kenya, he was a student of London School of Economics, and he had published an account of native Kikuyu people. He has written his ethnography of his own people, and in that seminar, our great archaeologist L.S. Biliki was there. He also belonged to the same, he knew that language, Kikuyu language. So there was a heated debate between the two, between John Kenyatta and L.S. Biliki. Now, therefore, in that, Raymond Firth was organizing that seminar. Therefore, Raymond Firth was organized, sort of created or coined the term autoethnography. Next, please. It is largely a method and the product of researching, writing about personal lived experience and their relationships to culture. Next, please. Autoethnography involves the turning of the ethnographic gaze inward on the self while maintaining the outward gaze of ethnography looking at the larger context. It is a research to conduct and write ethnographies of their own people. As a methodology, it acknowledges and accommodates subjectivity, emotionality, and the researcher's influence on research rather than hiding from these matters or assuming they don't exist in the name of scientific practice. Thus, autoethnographers research themselves in relation to others. It is a research, writing, story, and a method that connect the autobiographical and the personal to the cultural, social, and political. Autoethnography should be, this is very interesting. It is Chang, not our Casey Chang. There is a lady, Chang. I like this phrase. Autoethnography should be ethnographic in its methodological orientation, cultural in its interpretive orientation, and autobiographical in its content orientation. Next, please. Now, there are, of course, Anderson regards it as an important methodological innovation in anthropology. Reid Hanare says that ethnography as an intersection of these writing genres, what he called native anthropology, ethnic autobiography, and autobiographical ethnography. It tries to convey to the reader the human qualities of both the ethnographer and the studied people, and thus, this is very important, to humanize the ethnographic encounter. Because the colonial ethnographic encounter was a very dehumanized experience. Here, autoethnography is trying to humanize that ethnographic encounter. Thus, in the field of anthropology, this is an experimental genre. Next, please. Let us leave this slide for lack of time. Next. Now, towards an auto-archaeology in India. This is what I believe, because I think I'm not using indigenous archaeology. Very consciously, I'm not using indigenous archaeology. I am using the term auto-archaeology, taking a clue from autoethnography. Now, why auto-archaeology? As I have already said, historicizing ethno-history of tribal groups, that is Gonds in central India. These are examples I'm giving, Santals in eastern India, or various groups in the northeast. Second is emic perspective, because this gives an insider perspective. And third, a means of challenging colonial stereotypes and decolonizing colonial forms of knowledge. Next, please. Now, this is very interesting. Just before this thing, I said, I just made a Google search, auto-archaeology. And I found this paper, this very interesting paper I found. Privileging, this is a paper written by lady Russell Ama Asa Engman, published in 2019. And she is from Ghana. privileging the Danish Gar direct descendant communities in a collaborative archaeological heritage project at Christianborg, the castle in Osu, Accra, Ghana. This is an analytical approach. I'm talking about autoarchaeology, where the roles and subject positions of researcher, practitioner, and descendant, mind you, researcher, practitioner, and descendant are held by the same person and foreground the self. Autoarchaeology excavates multiple layers: the politics of knowledge production, historiographical tradition, historical inquiry and colonial realities, and post-colonial legacies. Autoarchaeology at the castle attempts to challenge current dominant Western archaeological heritage, orthodoxy concerning study, use, and management of the past, and in so doing, offer possibilities for a decolonizing practice. What I mean to say, it has already been practiced in Africa. Next, please. These 3 slides I prepared this morning. Next, therefore, I have not got the printout. Therefore, when we talk of autoarchaeology in India, there are some ideas, So following Chang, I think I read here because I can't see it from there. Following Chang in one could say that autoarchaeology should be archaeological in its methodological orientation, cultural in its interpretive orientation, and autobiographical in its content orientation. There are some examples. Gods of Central India, they have Santals of Eastern India, they are also very well developed. My voice is, I can forward it. Sorry. Oh, I'm so sorry. I must apologize. Then megalithic tradition in the Northeast. We heard a very excellent presentation yesterday. Both primary and secondary practices, but also the important thing is 2 ladies from Northeast made very interesting presentation on the Khasi sort of megalithic tradition. This is what I call autoarchaeology. This is exactly what I call autoarchaeology. And you could, from that lecture, I had made presentation elsewhere, but then from their lecture also I could see that linking of megaliths not merely with mortuary. When you talk of megaliths, everybody thinks that it had to be linked with mortuary. No, megalithics are also linked with settlement and sacred grove and clan organization. Now, hardly any emphasis has been made. I mean, I am so glad that I listened to yesterday's lecture. Megalithic and conservation of biodiversity. It has never been tried. Moflong, I have visited Moflong. Moflong is the sort of one of the biggest, largest sacred groves in the country. And there also you find megaliths. So linking megaliths with biodiversity and biodiversity conservation is a very important area. There is also a gendered perspective, which we saw yesterday. What is the role of women? Next, please. So, and then what kind of genres in sort of autoarchaeology in India? Undertaking of archaeology of a community by the community members themselves by following archaeological methods. I think this today also we had a very interesting presentation. Personal and not, but autoarchaeology is not confined to mere archaeological excavations. Personal narratives written by some community members on certain archaeological aspects of the concerned community. There may be more such types. I will have to think about it because this term autoarchaeology I have just coined in the last 3-4 days. So I have to expand. Next, please. This is to concluding, I think. Next, I have dealt with 3 aspects: traditional knowledge system, new mythology, autoethnography, and their linkage with theory and practice of archaeology in India. One common aspect in all these 3 is the emphasis on community or tribal group. In Indian context, community engagement is relatively more pronounced in autoethnography and museum. Such community engagement has not made much headway, especially by tribals in India. Next, please. Autoethnography in the Northeast as a main means of assertion. I was mentioning that how autoethnography is emerging as a very powerful anthropological literature in the Northeast. Community museums. I have traveled extensively in Manipur. Also is a means of assertion, the community identity and community museum, they are co-terminus. Days are not far off when autoarchaeology would be used for the purpose. Inadequate community engagement implies archaeological practice in India to be somewhat elitist, relatively exclusive, and alienating. Reducing archaeology, if I'm used to to use this pejorative, to a harmless hobby. Like autoethnography and new mythology, could auto archaeology play a role in giving, sharpening voice to the voiceless in India to make archaeological practice becoming more inclusive and democratizing? I think it has already made its humble beginning. Only time will say whether it will be a mighty river or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Basa, for a really interesting presentation.
Would you please switch on your...
Can you hear me? No.
Sorry?
No, I was just thanking you for making a very interesting presentation, and I think provoking us to think much further than what we have been doing. And I think that's why I feel that this workshop is very, very useful and a learning process for all of us.
No, I must confess, I must convey my sincere thanks to Alok for his unique persuasive skill. Believe me, I am not in a position to leave my headquarters because we are submitting our self-study report to NAC tomorrow. And but I also could not resist the temptation of these titles. You know, when I saw all these titles, it is very difficult to resist your temptation. Thank you.
So thank you so much for making the time, and I would now invite questions.
I'll be quick. That was a very powerful presentation, and I have learned a great deal. I've learned a great deal at this conference from many people, but I think auto archaeology, which you have coined, I can see that as a real movement. And you as a leader in that, your word, your term. And I can see how it fits with Kelly Pollard's idea of Indigenous archaeology, with the work that Desiree Martinez is doing. I can see how you've captured all of that and put it into a term. So, congratulations, wow.
Thank you. I mean, I am really provoked. I mean, I am, you know, this I have just developed, you know, but I have just coined. I mean, it is not my word. I said, I thought that if it is auto-ethnography, why not auto-archaeology? That was a logical inference. And then when I was thinking of writing auto-archaeology, then I said, let me just go for a Google search. I went for a Google search and I found that in 2019, this paper on Ghana has been published. So, I mean, so I think I'm not absolutely wrong in thinking about auto-archaeology. Thank you. Yes, please.
Hello? Yeah.
Yes.
No, I just wanted to ask a question, Professor Smith's question. So in anthropology, autoethnography is more kind of still seen as methodological, right? And hasn't really challenged the theoretical or, you know, epistemological foundations that much. And so I'm wondering how this, so we talked about in the presentation yesterday, Dr. Pollard, and the presentation today by Dr. Martinez and others, they mentioned something about moving towards the epistemological, right? Like sort of using the word indigenous, but you know, there can be other terms, but indigenous archaeology or something. So it's epistemological change. So I'm wondering how you can maybe move, or in the way you're thinking, maybe move from methodological to like, it can be a theory. I mean, there's some things in India like tribal philosophy or something, but very, I think at a very early stage about how that could inform the theory, or, you know, not just the method, but the theory also. So I'm wondering your thoughts.
I'm reminded of a quotation. I don't remember who has said this, but I was very much influenced by that statement. That is, nobody can stop an idea whose time has come. I think autoethnography and autoarchaeology's time has come. I think the first step is to challenge, and that is what is being done by autoethnography and autoarchaeology, if I am allowed to extend that. You are talking of sort of you are talking about discourse. We have not come to that level. But mind you, if people are challenging, if you go to Northeast, I have very extensively traveled in Manipur. You go to Manipur, very tiny, small town or a big village, but a community museum, maybe a small room, but then excellent collection. They do not know how to display. That's a different story. That's what I'm saying. Overemphasis on science has alienated local community from their heritage. That we must have to bear it in mind. I'm not saying that don't use science in archaeology. I'm not saying that. But an overemphasis has an alienating influence, because people think that, oh, itna do, ye to science hai. I can't understand. Therefore, I don't like to do it. So this is what I meant to say when I say that an overemphasis on science. But the fact that we are saying that the mainstream population have to learn as much from tribal people as the tribal people have to learn from the mainstream population. Is it not a big jerk in the intellectual tradition? Don't you think that? So if you start with that, then you go, to me, going through the phrases and jargons of academia is less important than bringing my concept to the community. To me, that is much more important. I can leave it to more brilliant people than me. That I would say that whatever I can do, I'll do it. But my point is, it is the community which has to be given emphasis in any form of knowledge that we are producing in 21st century. That is the essence of whatever I've been saying. And my stay in, why this concept, how it came to me, because I worked as director Indira Gandhi Rashtriya Manav Sanggrahalaya for 4 years. That changed my outlook. The luxury of being an academician in an important university. That's a luxury, because you dwell in the realm of ideas. But then when you come and interact with the communities, that gives another perception, another idea. And when you give that primacy to the communities, that arrogance goes. So I'm now, when I meet a tribal person, I have all the respect which I have got a professor in Oxford University. I have got that kind of respect. Now, that is what is required. I think we have a false sense of arrogance in the academia. We think that we are here to teach others, but it is important that we must try to learn from others. The moment that will be a very humbling experience. At the age of 65, I think I am trying to be more humble. Thank you.
Just have to thank you that we are honored to hear you. And as you said that I had the persuasion power, it's not me who had the persuasion power, but all the resource person, their name had the persuasion power to bring one to another.
Yeah.
That's a link.
Yeah. No, as I said, when I saw the names and the titles, it is very difficult to resist. It's very difficult to resist. It's very difficult to resist.
And today also I feel honored that when I made my first conference here on a stone bead, quite a few questions came. Why Professor Basa paper was the first? Today you got the answer. If it is stone bead or it is ethnology or epistemology, it is person from India. We have one of the rarest person who talks about theory and who is one of the best historiographists in India has ever produced. This is Professor Basa, and who spent with us 2 days.
Thank you. I must apologize that I have to leave after lunch. So I'm going to miss very interesting lectures this afternoon. I mean, Rajan's your lecture and Madam Utta's lecture. I might escape halfway maybe. But Madam Sonia Madam's lecture I'm going to miss. But if you don't mind, Sonia Madam, if you could send me your lecture, I'll be more than grateful, because that's a very interesting topic I find.
Sir, we will share all the records.
Okay. Thank you. I'm really grateful that you gave me a patient hearing. Being passionate is important, but getting a very responsible gathering to listen to your passionately stated nonsense is quite another. I'm thankful to all of you.
Are there any more questions, comments?
It was a very interesting presentation, sir. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to ask one thing. As you are also a power of authority at some sense, I was wondering that there are lots of criticism also happening in a sense that the whole appropriation or clubbing together of various indigenous knowledges or worldviews in Indian context to make it a bigger, greater Indian knowledge, which there are lots of writings happening from V. Sujata, Lena Abraham, who talks about how that actually dismisses the worldviews of lots of indigenous community. And there are in recent writings of problematics of traditional knowledges, which is written by Bipin Jozo, and writings from the alternative centers, which is coming up, which trying to assert the epistemology, ontology, and axiology of indigenous community in the context of India. So in this whole discussions, how do you want to say this, the policy level or in the governmental level appropriation that is happening to make it the greater Indian knowledge, which actually in a lot of way dismissing those, that also in a way showing arrogance that you are also contradicting in your very, very, very nicely, and it's really moving as you talk about the archaeology, but I just wanted to know your opinion about it.
No, this is this. I'm so glad. I will take down your email, and this is what when an old haggards like me stand before the young minds. You have read more than me. The reference that you have said, I'm yet to read them, because if you want to be the most ignorant person on earth, become a vice chancellor. So you have read more than me. I mean, coming back to the question, I think that is the same thing in a way that was being raised earlier. My point is, let us do our job. One person cannot do everything. My point is, let us do our job. When I speak to some of the younger civil servants or my research scholars, I always say that when you are going to a tribal area, do not show your wisdom. For God's sake, do not show your wisdom. Have the patience to listen from them. If you listen, then only they will say. If you speak, they will listen, but they will not give any cognizance to whatever you have said. They will do their own things. Therefore, to make them comfortable with you is the first challenge. Our government's policies, the policies are failing because we do not listen to them. We think that an idea which is developed in New York or in Delhi or in Bhubaneswar would work for them. That doesn't, therefore they are thinking of वो कॉन्सेप्ट ही चला गया इसीलिए तो आजकल वो जो ITDA जो बनाया गया है इंटीग्रेटेड ट्राइबल डेवलपमेंट एजेंसीज इसीलिए कि लोकल लेवल में क्या आइडिया आ रहा है उसी के आधार पर दे वांट टू डू दैट बट I do not have all the answers. The way they were presenting the paper on Mandu, sometimes identifying the problem is as important than looking for solutions. So in my case, this is a very exploratory concept. I'm provoking and I'm using it. But then perhaps I have miles to go for that, which I'm not sure whether I will be capable. But then whatever I have told you, that much I can publish. Important thing is, in terms of government policies, these days, therefore, they are emphasizing that the local knowledge system hai, wo local knowledge system ko pehle we'll have to document, but then documentation to 19th century mein shuru hua hai. Important thing is, are you giving due cognizance? Problem is, we do not give due cognizance because we think that, are kya, whatever they do, we do it in a very dismissive way. That is not done. I will just tell a story, not story, an account, and then we'll stop here. A friend of mine, a student of ours, was doing fieldwork among the Bondo Highlanders. Bondo Highlanders, they are very, but they were very exclusive and they were not very, they don't used to trust people because they have been cheated again and again. So our student was there for a year. So the Bondo people, they used to like him. Another friend of ours went to do field work there. So he said that, could you please recommend somebody who will come with me for my field work. So our student gave recommended one or two names. One, a Bondo man accompanied my friend, who is a senior anthropologist. So काम करके, the whole day they worked, they came back to the camp. And after that, the day was over. So this gentleman told that Bondo man that, okay, you may go. The moment he said, you may go, he was very angry. Angry to the extent that he was trying to do harm to that person. And my friend, even though he was an anthropologist, he could not understand what has gone wrong, why he has become angry. At the time, our young student, he came. Then, because he used to try, that Bondo used to like our young student. Then he said, what's wrong? Then he said, my friend told to my student, look, I was just told him that you may go, but he's angry. Then he said, what happened? Why are you angry? Now, the answer that he gave is to be borne by all of us. He said, this is my land. When I come here, when I go from here, it is my choice. Who is he to tell me to go from this place? Now, when you are working in a tribal area, we have to be sensitive to this point. Even though my friend was an anthropologist, he could not understand. So therefore, this is an answer. Therefore, when you are dealing with the tribal knowledge system or tribal knowledge system, one has to be the first thing is you have to be sensitive and respectful. Then do whatever you feel like. If you discard them also, doesn't matter. But to begin with, be sensitive and be patient. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Basa, for an excellent presentation and for forcing us to think further. Please say no, I'm sorry.
We'll talk during lunch hour. Okay, thank you. Because, others are getting delayed. I should not stand between you and the lunch.
Yeah, we don't want to, there are 3 more presentations.
Yes, I know.
Lunch and post session. And I will just request everyone to try and have a quick lunch that we are back here. And the lunch is just outside so that we can quickly come back, latest by 2:15.
Thank you. Thank you.
Binford published his seminal paper, Archaeology as Anthropology. There is a sea change. The whole methodology was started developing, and it took a completely different turn altogether. Fine. After that, there is a good amount of research and whole methodology changed. The way we started interpreting the past, completely, it was really a turning point in archaeology. Some time back, I felt that, okay, we have progressed a lot, but what has happened to anthropology? Why I'm saying, I had an anthropology background, then I switched over to archaeology. So one leg was there in anthropology, the other was an archaeology. Now, when we talk about this anthropology and archaeology, in Indian context, whatever I say, it's completely an Indian perspective. There is a dichotomy. If I remember correctly, a lot of research was going on in anthropology, particularly archaeological anthropology, way back 40, 50 years back. If you remember, the first excavation was carried out in prehistoric archaeology. That was by the anthropologist, not by the archaeologist. Slowly, it's already over. We got encouraged by Louis Binford's thing. But somehow in anthropology, they have never accepted what the archaeologists are doing. That's my feeling. And what's happening? There's a big difference? How do you interact with the anthropologists?
you.